Hi, and welcome to British Fencing Learning Week 2025, last session of the week, setting up with SwordSeat. I'm Rick Rodgers, British Fencing's Inclusion Manager with brackets disability, and the project lead for SwordSeat and everything related to the SwordSeat. So just a little what we're going to cover in this session. We're going to cover a little bit about the development history, how to assemble your sword seat, how to measure the distance and set up for a bout. The little tweaks that I found really help upgrade the sword seat and what you can do further to enhance usability. Basics of seated fencing, wheelchair fencing body positions, and then our vision for the future, and the use of the sword seat. If you can have any questions, please save them for the end or email me rick.rodgers@britishfencing.com. So as the first time I ever saw wheelchair fencing, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, the first question I asked is why have they got wheels? Because classical wheelchair fencing uses these big metal frames, rolls specially designed fencing wheelchairs into the frames, and then clamps the wheels on. And there's a lot of technology that's gone into working out how to clamp a wheelchair wheel in place, rather than just removing the need for the wheelchair wheel. And now I see some of the high level fencers to talk to me about, obviously it's easier to get on an aeroplane when you've got wheels on your wheelchair so that you can, bring it on as a mobility device rather than as sports equipment and things like that. And that makes total sense. But even still, when you actually get up to fence, I think there's probably systems where you could pop the wheels off and clamp in a much more suitable way. But anyway, when we were then looking at the level access report, which was our British fencing investigation into how to overcome the barriers and what the barriers were as part of developing wheelchair fencing and bringing it on board as part of the transfer of responsibilities, the level access report said that the equipment available for wheelchair fencing was prohibitively expensive. I mean, two people sitting opposite each other can be up to £10,000, if not over. And so that's very prohibitively expensive for clubs and for participants. And along with another couple of barriers that we're dealing with in different places. So we then started talking about how can we reduce the cost of equipment. One of the first things we did was a fencing frame loan scheme after the World Cup that we hosted in January 23. January 23? No, January 24. But at the same time, we were looking into other options, including reducing the cost of wheelchairs and creating a kind of flat packable fencing solution for those sitting down that doesn't involve such a high expense. I'm lucky enough that I know a Professor Ed Elias. He's part of the engineering department at Bath University. And as you may or may not know, Bath University has a good connection with fencing, as that's where our wheelchair world-class program are based. So it was a wonderful coincidence that I knew Ed very well. So I phoned him and I said, "Hey, we've got this problem. It would be wonderful if you had your students try and help us solve this problem." And so for his master's degree, Connor Roberts, one of the engineering students at Bath, worked on creating a solution for us to use for sitting down fencing, with the requirements that it's flat packable or easy to store, that it's as cheap as possible, but that it's safe and meets all of the safety requirements of fencing and acts like as close to a fencing frame and chair as possible. They then spent a year building that. The It was finished. I think the project was finished around this time last year, but then we had to go into a long period of safety testing, community testing, and getting it passed by the safety committee, who were, interested to make sure that the materials were sound, that the device was stable, and that it was all safe for individuals to use. Part one of the bits of that safety testing was making sure that it was stable, and there was a lot of concern from the committee that maybe it wouldn't function well for seated fencing. Um, and kind of one of the ways in which I worked to overcome this was videoing myself in various ways trying to knock the chair over, while sitting in it, whilst performing fencing activities and also performing all sorts of acrobatics and silly attempts. And I have not yet found a way to knock the chair over without literally lifting it from its bottom and flipping it. You have to get it out, like way over a reasonable degree before it'll flip, and usually the weight just slides a little bit before it gets to that point at all. To like If a very heavy fencer who's got the use of their legs is sitting in the chair, they can make it jump, but that's the case with the frames. And all you need to do is move it back to make that happen. And we've now been testing the chairs for over a year. The original prototype that is like in some of these pictures above, is the same prototype that I'm still using. There's a couple of little like marks on the wood where it's been knocked around in transit, but it is still perfectly functioning. I haven't painted it or lacquered it at all because I want to see how it deals with like weathering and wearing as a base unit, and I have seen no challenges so far. Um, yeah, so I think it's an incredible piece of equipment, and when you see it, and once we saw it, once Connor brought it to us, so um, it's amazing how much a simple solution it is in terms of answering the questions we asked of him, and everyone's like, oh, why wasn't it made before? But I guess it takes a really complicated process to come up with a simple solution, and that's what Connor went through, alongside Ed Elias at Bath University. So we've got some pictures here of it being of the earliest prototype up in this top left hand side, which has got a much wider base and was harder to transport. And then it was reduced into this prototype that you see here, and you see built beside us. So it's come a long way, and it's really exciting piece of equipment that really going to solve grassroots participation in wheelchair fencing. When you get your own SwordSeat, you'll find 14 wooden parts, and that's for 2 seats and the spacer, which altogether creates in our head one SwordSeat, because there's not much point in having only one side of the 2 seats. Who are you fencing against? So we consider both together with the spacer to be a SwordSeat. You'll need to also get yourself 4 ratchet straps. The ratchet straps need to be about 2 meters long, to go around the equipment. 2 cushions, one for each seat, and the alignment board, which will set up. That's the whole of the setup. And each of the pieces, as you can see in the image, have these little holes drilled into them, which number them off 1 to 6. And then, so each version has 2 numbers, 1, 2, 2 piece 2, etc. And that's the kind of order that you build them in. So it really helps you understand the process and like I say it's like a jigsaw chair, but in a way it's not like a jigsaw because jigsaws you can kind of get confused at. I find it very difficult after having done it once to ever like get it wrong putting this together. So it kind of teaches you in itself as you go. We were going to be out in my garden, but and I was going to assemble the one I have, but instead we've got a video for you. So I'm just going to play this video of you, to see the sword seat being put together. Ed videoing it one-handed, putting this together. Shows how easy it is, how light these pieces are. The heaviest of these pieces weighs around 3 kilograms. It just slots in like this. This is the seat it's on. So that side piece there that you saw slotted in just now and is in frame in the top corner, that's the handle, and that can go left or right-handed, depending on which of the two spots. That's the back. And we're all done. Now, put together just like that, you can sit on it, but I wouldn't suggest fencing in it. The additional bit that we haven't that you don't see on here is that the whole thing is connected together with two crossways ratchet straps that tighten everything and hold everything together. So the ratchet straps go through the tabs, one front to back, one side to side, and tighten the whole thing together. So it's nice and sturdy. At which point it's possible to fence with it, no problem at all. Now a lot of people find using ratchet traps very difficult. So we have this video, which is also on our YouTube, to help you learn how to put a ratchet strap together.
With the ratchet in the fully closed position, pass the end of the ribbon through the central hole at the hub. Pull the ribbon through until hand tight. If the ribbon is twisted, remove it and repeat this step, or fold the ribbon and pass through so it untwists as shown. To tighten, further lift and drop the ratchet handle until the ribbon is holding tension. To release the ratchet, locate the release pin at the handle and open the handle fully. You should now be able to pull the ribbon through freely.
Beautiful. Thanks to Rosie for voicing that for us. So I have the ratchet here again. This is the bit which you pass the ribbon through. This little dangly here is how you release and close. So it'll only go a certain way unless you and open only a certain way unless you pull this handle here, open it all the way out, and that's when you can release it fully. So make sure if you're having trouble and it's not releasing that you've really opened it up and pulled it all the way and that you really close it down. Now, what wasn't shown there is a trick that I now do. Instead of passing the whole ribbon through, once it comes round the device, I then fold the ribbon in two and stick the folded end through, which means you don't end up with so much having to pull through each time. And then again, as you open that, it'll ratchet over and complete the circle, saving you time later when you can then pull and release once you're fully out. So yeah, it's interesting. I've always found it interesting that teaching people how to use a ratchet strap is actually the most complicated bit of putting together a sword seat. So there we go. Once you've got your seat together, as you can see, you can have it either left-handed or right-handed, depending on which side you put that handle on. And then you can set it up either right to right or left to left, or right to left, obviously. When you have it set up so that it's, right to right or left to left, you'll see that the kind of chairs are moving in parallel to each other on the boards. This first picture on the left here is from the original prototype. We've updated it since with this divider instead. So those two pieces can now slide apart and be clamped together themselves if you want to have an extra bit of tightness and have an extra bit of spacing to stop the chairs sliding together. It's also much lighter in this format than this format. This was one of the heavier pieces, but the angling is still the same. If you're trying to change, so you want this on this angle so that they can fence together as they would set up on a wheelchair fencing frame in chairs. But then when you're measuring your distance, you don't need that spacer there, though with the new design it can stay there. You just move the chairs out or move it back, slide it across. If the person can't transfer, get the person who can transfer most easily to step out and shift their side, rather than asking someone who can't transfer as easily to step out. But fundamentally, then it stays in place. We found on some slippy sports hall floors, they can slide a bit. We've got some upgrades that we'll talk about in a moment to fix that. When you're measuring the distance, it's the same measurements as in wheelchair fencing. In general, I go to the inside of the elbow. There is one of the weapons. Forgive me for not being a ref and not remembering which one of the weapons is, that goes to the outside of the elbow. But when we're using this with grassroots fencers, and when I often use it at come tries and things like that, people tend to be less experienced and so won't move their chests as much as an experienced wheelchair fencer will. So having that slight shorter distance is generally more helpful in the practice. So up onto upgrading. Oh, lost my stick. Okay, here we go. Oh, upgrading your sword seat. That's Connor right there doing a hand build. So these can be hand built. Obviously, they can also be purchased pre-built using a CNC machine that we've outsourced, and but you can build them from either the printed pattern, which we can send out, comes in a little tube, or from the design file, and you can mark your own design. This is a video of Connor cutting it from a printed pattern that he created earlier. So some of the things that I've done to upgrade the sword seat and make it more usable, user-friendly, putting tennis strapping on the handle of the seat, because it's a wooden square. So putting some tennis strapping on it just softens that grip a bit and makes it more comfortable to use. Also, knocking the edges occasionally with some sandpaper helps to, knock out any of the splinters from banging it around in the back of the car, etc. I add neoprene rubber tape onto the base of the sword seat. I think it's about 5 meters for each base that you need to kind of get good coverage. And then I use gaffer tape on the front edge of the seat, just again to avoid those splinters coming through. Something else that you can do is, if you've got that extra slippery floor in your sports hall and you find that the sword seats are sliding about a little too much and you don't have space on the metal pieces to put them, you can get a bit of kind of old carpet that rolls out to measure, that kind of measures the distance. And if they're both on the same piece of carpet, the seat won't slip around half as much. Also, I've had a lot of people asking about where do you add straps, where do you add seat belts, etc. Now, it's a piece of wood, so fundamentally you can add them wherever you need them, just by, drilling or screwing into the wood directly where that strap needs to be put in place. on the design file when it comes out, it shares which pieces of like which areas are vital to have holes, which areas are less, are important not to have holes. But fundamentally, it's a very thick piece of wood. It's very unlikely to be damaged by drilling a couple of screws into it so that you can add your seatbelts and add your straps. The other thing is that some people who have a higher brake and so can't have such a low back, though I haven't met anyone yet, and I've been working at willpower events and with people with all sorts of grades of impairment. Um, some people may need a higher back to feel comfortable to use it. So that's an easy adjustment by just getting another bit of plywood and cutting a taller back, or adding a couple of bars and putting some um, fabric strapping around the back like you do for a standard wheelchair. It's an easy adjustment. I also have put occasionally bits of foam like cladding on the back of the chairs so that you don't get it's not a sore when you're leaning on it for long periods of time. Seated fencing basics. So when you're sitting down fencing and when you're standing up fencing, especially at grassroots, although the nuances of the sport are very different, the fundamentals are very similar. So if you're experienced coaching standing fencing, you can at least you can definitely get going with seated fencing straight away, and then pick up the nuances and the technical tactical like along your journey with your athlete. Um, there is one difference in target area in that, as you can see here, foil's target area is still the same. Legs are not valid target. In épée, the legs are not a valid target, whereas in standing épée they are. It's largely because you can't get your legs out of the way, so always a challenge in seated fencing. So those are never a target. And then in saber, again, everything else is valid except the legs. When you're fencing in a chair, a lot of people would think it's all in the arms, um, but there's a lot of movement of the torso to position yourself to retreat out of the way or to lunge. Instead of taking those steps, you'll see that a seated athlete leans one way or another, and they also slide across the seat to get a little bit extra distance, as you'll see. So these body positions, I've just numbered them 1 to 5 for ease of understanding. But like again, when you get into the difficulties, that you get into the technical and tactical, I believe they're called something different in specific wheelchair fencing. So the first position in your full lunge, you want to have you need to keep your seat at least one butt cheek on the chair at any point. Otherwise, you're carded for raising. But you slide all the way across. You keep your hand on the handle, and it's full reach, full lean out towards your opponent, with extended into that strike. Position 2, you find yourself halfway between neutral and this lunge. This can kind of draw people or prep your attack. Position 3 is your on guard position, that you're sitting neutral upright. This is the position that you'd measure distance in and start your bouts and finish your bouts from. 4, halfway from neutral to full retreat. Again, you can use this to draw your opponent or to give yourself a bit of space from their blade. And then position 5 is full retreat all the way across your seat with your back open. And Nat Lewis, who often coaches the GBR pathway athletes, he said it's like drawing a curtain. So you're kind of bringing both your shoulders back together to really pull out of the way. A lot of new people will kind of lean but leave their side open to attack. So you need to kind of drop that drop that front shoulder towards the rear as well and open up. in this full retreat position. So my vision for the sword seat for the future, I'd love to see one in every club. I think that there is, considering how like the sword seats solution is more than 90% cheaper than getting two chairs and a frame, and roughly equivalent to, a jacket, a sword, etc. in terms of pricing. So I don't see much reason for it to not be in every club. People like when we've stored at a club in the past, it takes up about like two sets take up about the same amount of space as one fencing sword bag would on a shelf. I can get six in the boot of my car, and I store them up in the attic or out in the shed when they're not in use for come try events and things like that. So there's not that concern about the setup time and the weight and the difficulty of storage than there is for having to have multiple wheelchairs and a frame, and the big metal frames. So I don't see a huge reason to not have them in every club, though we do have our target is I think 50% of clubs in the UK to have one by 2030. We are working currently with funding organisations and charities and local funds to see if they could support their clubs locally to get the money to make that possible. I've also tried to connect with the men's sheds organisations, but each men's shed organisation once set up is independent. But there are lots of places like men's sheds and schools and universities who have the kind of equipment and the people who understand how to cut and measure these to make these devices. So you don't have to do it at home on your own. You could farm that bit out to, scouts, schools, universities, a men's shed, etc., to get one of those made from there. I think that there's also a huge amount of opportunity for the sword seat to be used in training of standing fencers, which is another reason to have one in your club, even if you're not planning on working with seated fencers or wheelchair users, and you're not and you're not a fully accessible club. I still think that there's a value in having one in your club, because if you remove if you remove the option to run away, you get faster at your blade defense and response. So there's a lot of blade and handwork that's I think that the sword seat would be very valuable for. Also, in rehab, if you have a athlete with an injury who therefore can't participate, if you got the sword seat out and they could practice sitting down if they've injured their knee or injured their ankle and they're going to otherwise be out for 6 weeks recuperating, you could use that as a way to keep them in training, keep them working on different aspects of the sport. Also, we've got a club that has taken the sword seat into retirement spaces, into care homes to help them get active and use, and that's been really, really well received. So I'd like to see that kind of roll out in more places as well. And lastly, I think getting the sword seat international, once we've got the design files signed off, finally, we will be putting those out on the website, at which point people internationally can start building as well. I really want to do a connect, and I'm working on a connect with other national governing bodies of fencing in different places, so that we can work with them to help them support clubs to make and have sword seats in their locations. We've had, I think, 5 nations already requesting access to the sword seat. So that's really exciting stuff. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you want to find more information about the sword seat, you can follow the QR code or the web page that you can see online. And again, contact me for further information.